It's a little rickety, huh?
Yeah, this is...
We're going to go back and forth. Thank you all for coming. Are you okay over there?
Mine's broke.
Can we get a replacement?
Story of my life. No, it's okay. I don't care.
All right, just don't get too emotional and we'll be okay. Thank you all for coming. And thanks to the New Yorker Festival and to David Remnick and Rhonda Sherman for putting this together. Our title today is Rereading David Foster Wallace. That was not my title, and there'll be some more basic conversation going on as well. So don't feel you have to have read David once in order to be here to reread him. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I did not know what order they would sit in. So we're going to have to do it. We'll start with Mary. Okay. And you're going to notice a lot of awards, a lot of glamour, but I can promise you that these four panelists are all just regular people like you and me. But I'm certainly the least laureated in this crowd. Mary Karr is a poet and essayist. She has written 3 volumes of memoirs, The Liars Club, Cherry, and Lit, bestsellers and critical darlings all, as well as 4 volumes of poetry, the latest being Sinner's Welcome, published in 2006. And I would say, just as an interjection, if you want to find the true Mary, go to the poetry, which is amazing. And she is the Peck Professor of Literature at Syracuse University. The Peck Professor. Okay. Going along, next to her is Dana Spiotta, who is a novelist, and by coincidence, yes, also a professor of English at Syracuse. Now, that may seem like a setup, but in fact, I hadn't realized it until I was preparing the biographies, because I know Dana entirely from her writing, which is extraordinary. She's written 3 novels that, and I hope this won't scare you away if you lock the doors, there are 3 novels that explore the postmodern condition. Lightning Field, Eat the Document, which was nominated for a National Book Award, and most recently Stone Arabia, which was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award. Next is Mark Costello, and I have to move my papers around. Okay. Mark is the author of 2 novels, one called Bagmen, which was written under the pseudonym John Flood, and he can tell us why later if he likes, and the other called Big If, which was nominated for a National Book Award in 2002. Like the young man whom he roomed with, David Wallace, he has a fondness for graduate education because he also holds a law degree from Yale, which he hardly uses. Last, and by no means least, because in fact our most experienced panelist to whom we look for guidance is Deborah Treisman, who is one of our own, having got her first rejection from the New Yorker fiction department when she was just 11. I got mine, I was 14 or 15, so I feel like she's more precocious than I am. She is now the fiction editor at the magazine and has been since 2003, where no doubt she has written her share of those same rejection letters. This year, she won the Maxwell Perkins Award for Distinguished Achievement in the Field of Fiction, and she actually edited David, which makes her unique, at least formally edited David, which makes her unique among the 5 of us. My name is D.T. Max, which is not a real name. My name is Daniel, but my writing name is D.T. Max, and I wrote a biography of David called Every Love Story is a Ghost Story, which you are also not expected to have read to enjoy our panel. So we're going to start with a few questions, and then after some period of time, you're all going to be invited to ask a few questions. Let's get started with kind of obvious, but I think useful questions, which is the first time you met David Wallace, and we will start in order of who met him when by going to Mark.
Well, I hate going first, but...
I went first.
What's that?
I went first.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening.
No, that's all right.
Did you say something?
You were wise not to.
Okay. We were, as Daniel said, we were both sort of 2 of the bigger misfits in a freshman class at Amherst College. So I met him probably in the winter of 1980 or 81. And, basically our first conversation was about vomit, which was...
Vonnegut?
Vomit.
Oh.
Kurt Vomit is a famous writer. I think he's in the next panel. You might want to stick around. No, we were talking about, we were with a group of people at night. I didn't know who said this, but people were talking about how they had breezed through the admissions process, a bunch of very Protestant, accomplished, beautiful people. And I said, you know, I was so scared when I went because people in my family didn't tend to go to colleges like this that I actually threw up. And Dave, you know, the lifelong struggle with insecurity and everything else, he sort of piped up from the darkness walking across this campus, you know, that soft Illinois voice, you know, something like, you know, me too, or something like that. That was the first time we bonded over vomit.
But you threw up in different places, if I remember right.
I grew up in Boston.
No, you threw up in different places.
We threw up and grew up.
Yes. Yours was the Lord Jeff.
My throw-up story, if you must know, Daniel, and apparently you must. So far, the place where I've thrown up was...
I'm going to put a stop to this. Let's move on.
Enough
Thank you,
of
Mary.
Move on.
We'll take a pass on that. We'll go right to Mary, who next... Okay, so Mark meets David. You're both 18, right? Or you're 17?
We're both 18, yeah.
18, and both kind of, you know, the kinds of people who didn't expect to be, for one reason or another, at Amherst in different ways. So, Mary, when did you meet David? And
You'll have to remind me what the year was. I'm not good about remembering years. I met him...
88-ish, probably.
I met him in Cambridge right before they sent him off to the mental Marriott, I think, at Harvard, on the steps of some building, and he was we have mutual friends, and he was very obsequious. I'm older than he is by not quite a decade, but is very, oh, Miss Karr, you know, like this. And a lot of people, he does this, or used to do this, I think, as a kind of snotty thing. But people always thought he was really nice, but it felt so creepy to me.
The Miss Karr thing.
I said, what the fuck is wrong with you? You know what my first name is? All our friends call me by that. You know, don't act like you're 11 and, you know, we're in Boy Scout camp.
Did he call you Mr. Costello when he met you?
No.
Ms. Treisman, when did you meet David?
We would have met around 94, 95. I was working for a literary quarterly called Grand Street at the time, and he published, I can't remember, either 2 or 3 small pieces from the manuscript of Infinite Jest there. And so I'd worked on a couple of those, and he was in town, and I think we were meant to meet up for dinner with Gene Stein, who was the publisher of the magazine, and who was notoriously late. So I just remember both of us arriving at Da Silvano's punctually and sitting there for about an hour and a half making a nervous conversation while she failed to show up. And we couldn't actually order anything. But that was, you know, like vomiting. It was a bonding experience. And we didn't eat, so we didn't throw up. But we got along. And after that, I edited him there again, and then at the New Yorker.
And what was your first impression of him from that meeting?
Well, it was an impression that, you know...
Because you only knew him from the work at that point, right? I mean, the Infinite Jest had already been begun.
It was an impression that became the classic one later, you know, with his bandana and the long hair and slightly nervous and glasses and failure to make eye contact and social avoidance and all of those things, which sort of became his classic public persona later. And
did they add up to a charming companion, or would you feel awkward?
I found it charming. He didn't call me Miss Treisman. I can't remember him calling me anything, actually, but I was younger than him, so maybe that was the difference. He didn't have to treat me with respect. I look back at some of our correspondence before coming here, and I noticed that most of the time he referred to me by a name after your heart as DT.
Oh, that's nice. That handy coincidence. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
What am I doing here?
So, Dana, I understand you never met him. How'd you get here? Tell us about, you know, well, you can meet a writer in a lot of ways, right? So,
That's true.
So how did you meet him in that sense?
Well, you know, I started reading Wallace when I was in college, and Broom of the System came out, and then it was very exciting because there weren't a lot of younger writers writing that way, which I kind of, I was am a big DeLillo fan, and there seemed to be, baby DeLillo or something. And that was very exciting because his ambition to write about the totality of the culture and language as an entry point and just all those language systems that Wallace was so good at getting down and then twerking. And this, to me, seemed exciting and not afraid to have ideas in fiction as well, not just... to me, that was kind of gave me permission to be ambitious in that way, too. And then marrying that kind of DeLillo idea-driven stuff with this colloquial, accessible, sort of self-deprecating kind of Salinger voice that sounded very young. That was very exciting. It really was.
And you never actually, did you ever write him to tell him how you felt? Or?
I sent him books, but I think he probably got a lot of books.
Nothing
I never wrote him a letter, no.
Right.
No, not at all. But I did go to a reading at Barnes & Noble for, I think, the paperback tour of Infinite Jest. And although he seems extremely famous right now, all I know is it was standing room only, and I could just see that bandana head across many bookshelves. So,
right.
Yeah, that's about it.
I'm going to do one of those sneaky things that moderators are allowed to do. I'm going to read you something you wrote me. You may not see his influence in my prose. He has those maxed out, breathless sentences, and I'm much more austere. But my first novel has an adored, mentally ill, fragile, older brother character who is obsessed with Wittgenstein. Draw your own conclusion. So help us to draw a conclusion there. That's your first novel is Lightning Field.
Yeah.
It's really about, it centers really on two women, and most of all on one woman who has who's living in Los Angeles and has a couple. It's not really Wallace territory. It's really, in some ways, about the emotional life of a woman living in Los Angeles, though with a lot of attention to, again, lock the doors, the postmodern condition. But help us draw the conclusion.
Well, I think that the other thing that Wallace was really exciting about him, and still is exciting about him, is that, that kind of, in this engagement of language systems, which especially in that book I was very excited about, I was doing also sort of consumer culture and self-help and all these kind of received language and cliches and how you, as a writer, interrogate them to find out interesting things about the cultural moment. That was sort of my whole gambit. And he was doing, and other writers do this, and I think with Wallace, what was interesting too, and I think what makes him unique, is that in his engagement of these things like the 12-step or recovery language, he was interrogating it and sort of seeing it as both banal and reductive, and yet something that can save somebody's life.
Right.
So there was this complicated thing, which I think gets this idea of earnestness and irony together, that was really Wallace's sweet spot, thing that he owned, and many people do it since, but I think that tension was, very much of that, that era.
What year would we be in for this kind of thought?
Well, we're talking about Infinite Jest, so what are we talking
That's
about?
96.
That's 96, and Lightning Field doesn't come out till 2001.
Okay.
So I even though I'm not,
Right.
I'm pretty much, Wallace is maybe 5 years older than, or was 5.
You would be
so,
50, yeah.
But I didn't start publishing until I was 34.
Just a question. So Wittgenstein, for serious Wallace readers, tips off the first book of his, The Broom of the System.
Right.
Was that a book that you liked as well? It was a very different book.
I did love that book.
Me too. Me too.
I thought it was.
We can say it here. Everyone.
It's just fun. It's
the best.
Funny.
I know.
It's
so hard. When I was writing the biography, that was a book I loved, and I remember coming on a letter that David had written to John Franzen, where he said the book could have been written by a smart 14-year-old. And I was heartbroken because, if it could be written by a smart 14-year-old, who should read it? 7-year-olds. Was it were you aware, was this an act of literary, whatever, there's a French word for it, but I don't know the word, a taking in there of his
idea.
I,
you what is it that Harold Bloom's with? You just, misread your...
Right.
The misprision.
Yes, exactly.
There's a misprision where you kind of misread somebody.
Right,
And
you get what you need from the places you want to take it from, and Wallace has definitely had things that I wanted to take, and whether he would agree with them or not, we don't know. But yeah, that was interesting to me. It's a little bit of a, I think, it was exciting. Like I said, I like the idea of having ideas in fiction and having things driving the fiction, not just narrative, not just character, but also ideas. And I still feel that way.
Here's one for Mark. Among all the writers in the universe, you had the rare experience of collaborating with David Wallace on a book. True. The book is called Signifying Rappers, Rap and Race in the Urban Present, and I think it came out in I think 1990. What was it like, and why did you never do it again? Another way of asking is, would you have done it again? But tell us the story of a strange idea for most of us, David Foster Wallace collaborating on a book.
Yeah, I mean, he was so, tunneled down into himself in terms of the writing technique. I mean, what people respond to in the writing is it seems like it comes from something even deeper than the heart. And so for him to sort of have a regular conversation, we should put in more of this and less of that, it was impossible for him because he wasn't using the front lobe of his head at all, his brain, to write, which is strange. He's thought of as such a smart writer, but in fact, he was sort of like an animal in a cage.
That's a great way of saying it. Didn't y'all write that in that apartment in Somerville?
We were living...
Slummerville, as I think of it.
It was not maybe Mary Karr quality living conditions. We were out of school. We were...
I lived in a car, Mark. I mean... we were out of school, and we were living in sort of student slum housing in the Cambridge-Somerville line. And Dave had just had a breakdown in Illinois, a very serious one, and had come east and said, let's live together. He now considered himself cured because he was constantly considering himself cured. Every week he was reinvented. Okay, that didn't happen. Now I'm this. So he called me and said, let's live together. I'm going to get a PhD in philosophy at Harvard, which was, what? And so let's live together, and it'll be fun, and we'll just bang around. So what he didn't tell me is that he was coming off a suicide attempt. So we lived together, and he started with this. He was working on a huge essay about pornographic films and the sort of capturing quality of pornography. And this was 10 years before Infinite Jest, or 8 years or something. And that book stalled, as his books kind of stalemated for him sometimes. So someone said, why don't you, he got into rap music. It was the summer of 1989, and rap was just kind of bursting into the pop charts. And
but just, if you don't mind, just tell the story about the rap concert the two of you actually went to.
Well, he got into rap music sort of theoretically, and I said, it's actually this thing that people listen to.
There are rappers out there.
Right.
We can meet them.
And I said, and it's Boston, which has had a great music scene in every which way, and I said, let's go out. And I was able to get him to go out that year. And again, I didn't know how bad things had been just before he came. And he didn't, he sort of compartmentalized what he told you. It was like dealing with Richard Nixon in some ways. And so we got him to go to a couple rap concerts. So we went to one rap concert, and they were all at hovels and high schools and so forth. And he had an immediate panic attack because he was, sort of agoraphobic and claustrophobic. And so he vanished. And I spent the whole concert looking for him because I was afraid that he'd been hung, I don't know, whatever, strung up by his heels or something. Turned out he was, had run back to the apartment or something.
And the sound system didn't work anyway, right? There was no rap that night.
It turned out there was no concert. They'd oversold the tickets. It was a cab. But this is life, Dave. This music comes from somewhere. It comes from this messy city place. But anyway, he wanted to write this essay, and then that too stalemated for him. And so he said, why don't you write this part of it? Because I can't write about this, and I can't write about that. And so we sort of ended up writing pieces. But it was really a survival tactic for him, because the other thing that was happening was he was getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And then at the end of it, really 2 weeks after the book was finished, he was then at Harvard, and he called me and said, I'm going back to the hospital. So it was written in this little period of fun, if you want to call it that, between these two terrible breakdowns. And that's the last drink that he took. I mean, that's when he went into recovery.
And if I remember right, a lot of the work you guys did was actually almost more like you were mailing the manuscript to each other. You would work during the night, and he would work during the. He didn't have a job. You were working as an assistant. No, you were a private lawyer at that time.
I was practicing law. So
Yeah.
3 years out of college.
And David Wallace was home writing, so sort of every morning Mark would put on his suit and go off to his office job at some corporate law firm, and then when he would come home, David would still be in the same chair that he'd been in when Mark had left in the morning, writing away, or not writing, or almost writing, or whatever. And
You watched a lot of TV, or did y'all not have a TV then?
I don't know if they had TV there.
Couldn't have lived without a TV. I mean, it's a goofy story, really, but I think, the sort of patterns were laid out. We wrote comedy in college, so the comedy was written that way. He would write a scene about that, and I'd say, well,
that's
I'll
Sabrina, the Amherst magazine.
And I would write a responsive scene, and that's how the comedy was written. So you have, I think at some level, we were, no one's as pessimistic as a 26-year-old, right? No one has as little faith in the future. So at some level, we were going back to things that had been fun when we were 21, and he was a lot sicker than he was letting on. But yes, the whole thing was very much sort of at arm's length at some level, but he would write all day, watch TV, drink, smoke weed, and produce these unbelievably, Gothic paragraphs, and I'm supposed to respond to that.
It's a very interesting book. If you can get a hold of a copy.
It's being reissued next year, I think. Little Brown is.
Well, then if you can get a hold of a copy quickly, sell it on eBay, because it goes for enormous prices, and that'll probably stop when they reissue it. So Little Brown is going to reissue it?
Yes.
Out. All right. Then you don't have to email me for my Xeroxed copy, which I was going to offer to make to anyone who didn't leave the room when I said the words postmodernism. To Mary. Okay, for a lot of people, Forever Overhead, the story of a young man who wavers before jumping off a high dive on his 13th birthday, is a favorite.
Really? Is that true?
It's true. Huh?
I didn't know that. He threw that in the trash can. And I said, this is so much better than this other shit. Don't throw this away. He's like, no, it's, sentimental, it's blah, 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 blah. And
Can you just tell us a tiny bit about how the story differs from the other things that he was writing, or that you'd been reading of his?
In one, let's say, one is just sort of like a loss. His other writing, to me, feels very decorative. It feels like it's got a lot of sequins and gewgaws and pyrotechnics and shit going off and play pretties and like down here and down there and that down this way. And this, to me, it seemed very felt. And I think it was actually closest in some way to who David actually was, to his heart, because it was so much a story about fear of performance, which is what, am I wrong, Mark? 95% of his life is about fear of performance.
Yeah, and that's why the pages are so incandescent, because you think you're reading something. He was performing. He's right there in front of you.
He was just dancing as fast as he could, and so it didn't. I didn't even. I mean, it was easy to see what was honest and felt, and I just thought this other shit that you're getting. Everybody wants to. Remember, they wanted him to make a Gap commercial. I said, God, don't be a dick. Wouldn't a Bokhoff make a Gap commercial? I mean, think again, D. I mean, and I said, you're going to be praised for all of this stuff, for being really smart. I mean, I had moved to Cambridge 10 years before, and I'd spent 10 years with people who were just, well, everybody's, I'm not that smart, but I mean, everybody's really smarter than you. And I just wasn't that into smart anymore. I was like, smart is only one thing. And if smart mattered, everybody at Harvard would be selling millions of books, and they're not.
I think it's important to give the context is he has a breakdown at the end of the rap book. He's sober. Someone who'd been high or drunk, pretty much every day for a whole long time.
Since he was 14.
Right, and so smart doesn't make you Scotch is still smarter. So I think cheap scotch too. But I mean,
Right.
having to turn to something other than smart to live.
Right.
Is
The
a terrible thing.
the AA slogan, "Your best thinking got you here," is here. Now, I wanted to go just because that's this kind of segue that someone who's running a panel only gets once in a lifetime. I'm going to pass this one on to Deborah, and I'm going to read to you something from a writer of minimalist hip fiction named Bret Easton Ellis, who tweeted this recently. Okay, he said, "St. David Foster Wallace, a generation trying to read him feels smart about themselves, which is part of the whole bullshit package. Fools." And I looked it up, and Bret has 300,000 followers. I love that I have a follower. I have followers now, too. Okay, so. Follow me into the cyber world. So now, this is what we all know, but if those who are really good at Googling can dig up an earlier comment that Bret made right after David's death that I find slightly more interesting. Okay, he says, "The way he spoke about a lot of things is just not my school of thought. And yes, he was probably a genius. And yes, I was very moved by his death. I was very touched by his pain. I really was. It was a shock. And I was in tears. But let's just get real and separate the man who I did not know and the work. You can be too smart for fiction." So before you answer that, I'll also throw in something.
Spoken like somebody dumber than David. I mean, I'm dumber than David too. That you guys
We're all
are
dumber
too,
than David. Yeah.
Everyone.
Thought
Well,
I'd break it to you up here.
Yeah. Okay, Thornton Wilder. Literature. He told this to a reporter from Time, which I like in and of itself. Literature is the orchestration of platitudes. So that might suggest that there would be such a thing as being too smart to write fiction. So Deborah, would you mind to just talk a bit about what this calls up in you?
Wow.
Can you be too smart to write fiction, and therefore, by extension, was David?
Might not be too smart enough to answer the question.
Yeah.
But, I think this was obviously a struggle in his work, and especially in the later work, which was that the more thought and the more research and the more intensity and the more agonizing he put into something he was working on, the less good it got, often. And he was too smart in the sense that he was overthinking and rethinking and self-doubting and tearing things apart. And so, that was what hung him up in his later years as a fiction writer. To that degree, he might be too smart. I don't think, that Infinite Jest or, many of the stories that we've read and love, I don't think those are signs of an intelligence too strong for fiction. I think, it was just absolutely fascinating the way that he was able to take ideas and put them into plots and make those two things work together, and that was the magic of Infinite Jest. I think what Bret Easton Ellis mostly was objecting to in his long series of tweets was this sort of posthumous hagiography of David Foster Wallace, where everyone has sat around now since he died saying how incredible he was, and maybe to the detriment of some living writers. And one thing that your book does is focus us somewhat on the real person who was a flawed person and the difficulties that he went through, instead of onto this posthumous look back at how brilliant the work was and what a genius we lost. So there's a tension there, and I understand for someone who is still plugging away, I understand why you'd feel irritated.
So you're saying what he's really saying is that the St. David thing has to end.
Yeah.
He's just pissed because they're not reading him.
Well, he's got 300.
It's not the 80s anymore.
He has 300,000 followers.
I don't
you
actually.
can found a good-sized nation with 300,000.
I don't disagree with some of what he's saying.
Yeah,
by the way.
yeah. Tell us.
And I think Infinite Jest should have been shorter.
Mm-hmm.
And
shorter than 140 characters.
But he was also happy when J.D. Salinger died too, though, right?
That I didn't know.
Yeah, that's
I'm not one of his 300,000 followers.
Somebody with a heart on.
I think he said something. I think he said, "Finally, at last."
I was gonna ask Deborah if she had this experience. Mark, you must have edited him or tried to, right?
Well, I'm sure, yeah. I mean, I can't really think of any successes in that department. But
Did y'all have the experience of when you ask him to cut something or clarify something, of it coming back 9 pages longer? That thing where it was like, instead of...
Well, no, you might get a 9-page note about why he couldn't do it. No, I mean, do you want me to talk about it?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I mean, I edited him several times over years, and again after he was dead, which was much easier. But what I felt was that, you know, maybe the first time back at Grand Street, he was still, you know, maybe in his, I guess, early 30s. He was relatively early in his career, and he hadn't had the success of Infinite Jest yet, and he was working at something and working in such isolation at it that he had a sense of it, I think, as a house of cards. And if you as an editor said, take this card out, he feared the whole thing was going to crumble. And he didn't have enough confidence in the infrastructure to make changes. So he was, at that point, very resistant to editing. Later, I found that really shifted, especially when he was working on stories. And, you know, I was looking at stories, and often... you know, there were a couple of stories, Oblivion being one, that he sent to me at the New Yorker saying, I know there's absolutely zero chance you're going to publish this in the magazine, but if you want to take a crack at editing it, you know, that would be great, because I've hit a wall.
These are the stories that wind up in Oblivion? That
yeah, specifically I remember him saying that with Oblivion, and saying, you know, what he said about Oblivion was that he wanted the story to be brutal, but not brutal to read. And that he was just struggling with this, and he wanted to cut it, and he didn't know how, and so on. So later, I think he sort of, it was a weird mixture of both being more desperate for advice and being more confident in what he was doing, to know that he could accept advice.
You know, I think the key thing that isn't really understood is that his meter for judging what was good Dave Wallace or not good Dave Wallace was utterly unlike anyone who's ever written, and basically... Wrong. Well, I don't agree, frankly.
You don't think you don't?
I don't, and I mean, I think he wasn't talking the same language that everyone else talks. I think his criteria was, how did I feel when I wrote this? I remember 6 months ago in a snowstorm in Illinois, I wrote this, and I didn't feel bad for 3 whole days. And so it's like we'll always have Paris or something. He talked about writing the way athletes talk about hitting baseballs. They can't be rational about it, really. It's just, it happened, and it went 600 feet. So you would say to him, like, do we really need, you know, 18 pages about the puppy's flashback? And he would know that you were right at every literary level, but it felt good to write that, or rather, it was an absence of bad for an entire day. And so there was this terrible sort of neediness that surrounded it, because it was really something that kept him from feeling bad. But that's not necessarily a recipe for constructing these elegantly packaged things. Yeah. The whole smart, dumb Dave thing just makes me crazy, because it's such a terrible, terrible way into this person and this writer, I think. But, you know, what are you going to do, tweets about dead people? I don't know that they're...
Mary.
Say again?
Did you have something to talk about in this?
Am I supposed to say something?
I thought you were about to offer something. I heard a beginning of an offering. Well, let's go.
Trying to think. I mean,
you actually edit?
What you and I were disagreeing about a second ago, and maybe I misheard what you were about to say, is you're going to say that his sort of view of his own writing was wrong. And I agree with that in the sense that, and particularly when you knew him, which was a hugely influential time, you convinced him, look at the people. You know, it's not just
I was interested in him paying attention to, as I am with, you know, I'm a professor, I profess. I've been teaching, you know, for a long time. I was teaching then, and yes. I was a little bitty baby teacher. And, but I still had a very developed sensibility that said to me that he should care more about his reader than he did showing off. And that everybody laughs when I say Infinite Jest should be shorter. I challenge you motherfuckers to tell me you've all read it, other than Dana, who's smarter than we are too. that you've read it word for word and you think that that it shouldn't have been.
Wait, before we take the challenge, hold on. You've said this to me many times, and what I want to ask you is what part should be cut?
I would cut all that Quebecois shit.
That's right, I know that.
I would. No, I'm serious. All this stuff, most of the stuff in there that I thought was great was nonfiction. Was stuff he took from real life.
All right, but let me just...
Well, can Dana, let's Dana had a thought, and I saw...
No, Mark, go ahead.
Wait. These two are like, they've been at this
I love that.
All right, go ahead.
How long have we been doing this, Mark?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, Dana had a thought.
I just thought maybe you could talk a little bit about when you were talking to Wallace about this putting more feeling in his work, more human, more humanity in his work, or whatever you want to call it, more... not just sort of running to the ironic escape. You were recommending things for him to read, and this was during the making of Infinite Jest, right?
Right.
And so I mean, in your book, you're saying the Gately stuff and the stuff that is really kind of comes out of the post-Mary.
Mary and John Franzen tag teamed David at a moment, a teachable moment where he had just come through detox and was in a halfway house, and my reading of it is, the half of Infinite Jest that's about Hal and Cadenza and the kind of merry-goings-on at the tennis academy are really pre-detox. This is oversimplifying, and the whole Don Gately moment, which is this kind of almost Dostoevskian kind of lug, this Dostoevskian criminal who's beginning to discover what it is to be human, really comes out of a kind of combination. I mean, three things: John, Mary, and the fact that he's in this situation that's just totally different.
But I want to say another thing. I mean, it's wonderful that everybody, I think Franzen was, in fact, a wonderful, really a noble friend to David, as I understand it, at the end of his life. Franzen didn't spend a day in the same town with David for 10 years. Their relationship was epistolatory. And that means that it's more fun to write about because you got the letters. But in terms of Jonathan influencing David, I'm not saying I influenced him either, but I'm saying Mark influenced him. Mark was living in the same house with him. So in terms of...
But even Mark's relation was epistolary because they would leave sections of the book for each other to work on at night if they didn't live there together.
When I lived in the same town with him, he wrote me 19
right, around the corner.
single-space letters. When
it was God's gift to U.S. mail. That's why they're losing money now. Right. So you were asking a question. No, Dana. Did you get an answer?
I wanted to hear sort of what that was, you...
I would too.
...had him... What those conversations were like. Did he agree with you and was reading? I know that Dostoevsky, Chekhov, these things,
Tolstoy, Chekhov, Babel.
Harry Crews.
Say again?
Harry Crews.
Harry Crews.
Right, Harry Crews.
Cormac McCarthy, Flannery O'Connor. A lot of memoirs. The Nabokov of Penin, not the Nabokov of Lolita, the Nabokov of Speak Memory. And I wasn't saying you should have more feeling in the books. I was saying you should be writing for a reader, not to calm yourself down. Mm-hmm. I understand we all start writing because I want to get the like slender boy who like had tofu in his soup or something to like me at my college or whatever. And
well, who doesn't, Mary?
and at some point you have to give more of a shit about the reader than, as Mark said, than you do about how you can't judge or gauge the value of a piece of writing based on how you fucking feel writing it.
All right, but just 2 quick points. And we were all 3 of us friends, and so I'd hear Dave coming away from Mary and both being in awe of her and also being pissed off, and you get that real sort of thing, very prissy. I can't believe she wants me to give me a reading list. The first thing, though, is that any conversation with Dave about you ought to do this, you ought to do that, fundamentally misses the fact that he was an animal in a cage. He did what he had to do right now, and that when he wrote certain things certain ways, it was like getting the instrument in tune, and he didn't feel bad while he was writing it. So telling him, well, you ought to figure out how to write differently, he was using inspiration to stave off collapse. It was much more of a desperate production than almost any other writer. But the second thing I would say is, with that said, we are to some degree formed by our books. I do believe that in the 80s, when he and I were living together, reading a lot of the sort of guy fiction that was coming out in the 80s, and then I think he went into rehab, and he came out, and what's left? And at that point, Mary in particular, other people too, but Mary centrally said, you have to read these suffering writers. And for the period where Infinite Jest, I agree with you totally, Daniel, the period where the sort of rough parts of Infinite Jest get formed, the influence is, Red Cavalry, Itzhak Babel, and Harry Crews. They're books about tattoos and amputations and, unspeakable suffering that no sense can be made of, that's also comical, of course. So, I mean, that's a huge influence. I don't want to make it sound like he was some sort of idiot savant or Rain Man or something like that. I do think, though, it's a mistake to think that this smart guy was at all intellectual about how he wrote. It was all what makes me feel not bad right now.
But I never said to him, I want to say this, I never said to him, write differently. I said, cut out some of this shit. I never said, don't write like this. I never said you're not a good writer. I think,
and this will be the last thing I'll say, because
all right, goddammit,
I think you were the anti-influence. I think New York, I think the literary centers were telling him, we've brand named you as X. And he knew that he couldn't be X anymore because he had to go to AA meetings twice a day. What smart person has to go to a meeting twice a day? And you were saying, no, there's Y. There's this whole other thing out there that you can be. Look at these guys who lived. So, I mean, I think it saved his ass.
Well, not like you did. I mean, Mark had him strapped to his back for 15 years. I'm sorry. That is the truth.
Well, I think there's probably different ways to save a person. I think David probably needed saving all the time, every day.
Every way that by everybody who knew him.
Right.
Tried to save him.
Dana, you did not know him, and I wanted to try the question, therefore, to you a slightly different way, because you write very smart fiction. And so I wanted you, even somewhat not without reference to David, to say, is it possible to be, too smart? John Franz, in a letter to Wallace, talks about David's the refusal to do these sort of, I think the phrase is the honorable spade work of fiction, creating character, moving them around, Wilder's orchestration of platitudes. So is that an issue for you?
No.
You don't feel too smart to write fiction?
No.
Oh, you feel too smart to do other things?
It's against my limits all the time.
What do you mean?
And I mean, I don't feel smart enough to write fiction, but I do think that you can, that I think it's also important to be, these are going to sound, I will just say, I think it's important to be brave, and I think it's important to work hard, and I think it's important to try to tell the truth, and I think it's important to feel that there's something real at stake. Because, I mean, I had a very smart writer tell me there are things that nobody else knows. Write about those things, meaning that, we all have our own subjectivities, and if we speak to those specificities, those eccentricities, the miraculous thing is other people recognize that as human. And I think this idea that David had about consolation that you get from fiction, he's constantly writing about the failure of language and the failure, the impossibility of empathy and being able to get beyond your own subjectivity. Right. It's constantly coming up. And yet, when you read his work, you feel a recognition, which is not insignificant. So I think that he got saved by fiction because it wasn't 100%, but it was really as close as you're going to get through fiction. And I think that's the kind, you are writing to save your life, and you're writing out of desperation, and that's why it's great. But yeah, I mean, the smarter you are, the better. Gee, it's really hard. He said math took 50% and fiction took 90%. And he's a genius, right?
But I mean, there's a certain kind of work that David seems to be reluctant to do, especially in the Pale King is the best example of it. For instance, in your books,
he didn't get to rewrite and didn't get to edit and didn't get to fix.
No, but he did. He starts it, in 1997 or so. So he spends 9 years more, right? 11 years with the book. But in your, in your stories, when someone has to get into a car to make the plot move forward, they get into a car, and if somebody has to try to meet somebody else given third place, it happens. And I always feel with David, maybe it's just my read, that was the part he liked least about fiction. Really, Westward, The Course of Empire, a very strange story that is the last story in Girl with Curious Hair, is interesting to read because in a lot of ways I feel it's David saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to take the whole edifice down over my head. And then from there, just biographically, he winds up in the halfway house in Detox, and from that comes the very strange rebirth of Infinite Jest. I mean, one obvious thing to point out is we're all here talking about David, so in some way, David's writing did do the trick.
Oh, absolutely.
It may be a remarkably strange way that it's gotten to all of us, but it has, and there are people, who I've seen people now, as I've sort of talked about the book for a while, who have sentences from Infinite Jest tattooed on their arms. I mean, it's an extraordinary...
People killed themselves after Kurt Cobain died, too. I mean, there's some dumb motherfuckers out there.
It's true.
I'm just saying.
Mary, here's one for you.
It's true.
What did you learn from David for the Liars Club?
Oh, my God. I learned a lot.
Because he either edited or somewhat edited. What was the actual process?
No, he didn't see any of it until I was done with the proposal, which was basically they set type from the first 3 chapters. So it was very clean. I wouldn't show him something that was medium shitty. I was too competitive. And I respected his opinion too much. But I learned so much about voice from him. He edited an essay of mine called Against Decoration. And I think his edits made it so much smarter. We had a great intellectual conversation over a long period of time. And about what's beautiful, about what's not beautiful, about what's of value. He didn't know anything about poetry. I didn't know a lot about metafiction. The only Pynchon I'd read was V. I read all of Pynchon with him. I read Barth. So I think I learned most about voice and that use of the vernacular and syntax. So he didn't edit Liars Club, but he edited essays, and he edited a lecture I gave. But
did he? So he read Liars Club when it was in galleys, or
no. We weren't even talking then.
Right.
I showed him the first 3 chapters before I sent him to my agent.
And what did he say about them? I mean, it's because I ask because it seems so far from what David himself was writing.
He said the nicest thing he could have possibly said, and he probably said it to get laid.
No, he loved it.
But he said, "This is so good, I'm jealous."
Oh,
which is as good as it got. Even if it was
That is
foreplay, it was a good line.
And I think that at a sort of first level, at a style level, you would see a gap. But you notice how many endangered children there are. I mean, when he had just read the Liars Club proposal, 3 chapters, he told me verbatim, perhaps quoting it, the story of the girl who is raped, Mary, who can't tell her dad because her dad will kill the rapist. And so, I mean, I think this idea of a child at risk and the child's secrecy keeps the whole world together. Violence leads to violence, leads to violence. I mean, that's something that sort of is implanted. And there's a lot of children at risk, children exploited, all the way to the end of Pale King. So there's style differences, but he was a pack rat. I mean, he was always picking up everything from everything happening.
From everybody.
Yes.
From everybody. I mean, not just from me,
But don't we all do that? I mean, you got something from him, he got something from you.
I walk around behind you with a notebook. I do.
Yeah,
I've been
the two of you,
meetings before. I swear to God.
you and David with battling notebooks must have been quite a
I have a
sight.
question, though, for Mary. Both of you were not, I mean, I guess David was a little bit famous, but...
Oh, no, he was very hip. I mean, it's beyond famous. I mean, famous is
but
nothing.
I mean,
in this business, hip is better.
Pre-Infinite
pre-Infinite
Jest.
Jest, right?
Yes.
Right.
And you had not yet published Liars Club, so you were definitely not famous.
I was
You were a
a
poetry professor.
sniveling little adjunct professor at 3 universities making $9,000 a year.
So you both get explosive, sudden fame.
Well, we weren't...
They're separate.
But you weren't talking at that point.
No.
So there was never, wow, isn't this strange how we ended up? No.
No.
I mean, we had conversations like 10 years later.
Okay.
But I mean, it is weird that the 2 books are written 100 feet apart.
Right.
Right?
And they were
both
both
at the same time in Syracuse, on a block in Syracuse, these 2 books are written. I mean, I don't really can't
Move to
think of
Syracuse and write a book.
You know
Apparently
what?
it's the
That's why we have 2 professors from
That's
Syracuse
why
here.
Dana...
After they'll
I'm
show you,
serious.
they'll show you the housing market.
I'm
right?
serious. The weather is so shitty.
All you can do is write.
It's like you're on a submarine.
You write and drink.
And you can't do anything but write. There's no help for you.
That's why I tell the MFA students, like,
All right.
don't go to Brooklyn, stay in Syracuse, because
right.
you'll have nothing to do. But
And it's cheaper. Mark, I consider you, of all the people on the planet, probably the person who knows David's writing best, because you know it both from the inside and the outside. And I'm curious what your favorite work of David, if you had to destroy all of it, but what would you want to keep? I think Mary would keep Forever Overhead.
I would keep huge chunks of Infinite
Would you?
Jest, too. Yeah.
Okay. Dana and I would keep Broom of the System, but we'd be unpopular for it. Deborah might keep Good People, or the chunks of Infinite Jest that she edited at Grand Street, but you knew him in a totally different way. I mean, you saw his college writing.
Back for 15 years, or he was strapped to mine.
You saw his college writing. You saw things none of us will ever see. There was a prose poem about the Midwest that certainly wound up, shredded 20 minutes after Mark read it. There was some early fiction that he told me about that as a biographer made me drool, which is not attractive, but it's all gone. I'm not a pretty drooler. So what what do you take with your special reading?
Well, I don't really believe in special readings, and I think that biography, but having known the person, it just creates pity. It doesn't help the right parts of the brain work. Pity isn't the right word, but I don't think I know the work any better than that person out there. Girl with Curious Hair, the story collection written, the individual stories were written in the middle 80s when he was in grad school. A lot of them were written, in a day with, ecstatic speed. These stories are written.
One written while you were doing legal work in one part of an office, and he was visiting.
At one point, the story, Forever Overhead was written there. But I think of how happy the writing of it made him, which is just a lame-ass way to judge a book. But he was my friend, so I'm sort of stuck with, were you happy then? One story in Girl with Curious Hair was written while I was on the phone. I got on the phone, and he started, it's true, he started writing. Right. Luckily, the account executive knew CPR, and I finished the phone call, and he was done. I mean, that's how immersive and astonishing the writing was. And I think they're also objectively great stories. I think it may be the last great story collection because it's sort of a vanishing vehicle, but I think it might be the last great American story collection, 1989. So,
when was Jesus' Son?
Before, right? About 3 years before.
I'm not sure. That was almost the same year.
And I don't know that Dennis Johnson, Jesus' Son, is quite a story collection, but anyway, it's a great collection. I don't know that I understand Infinite Jest, and I've read it a couple times, and one time in typescript, and I don't really get it totally, but I don't know how you can. That's a book that seems to me the greatest book, and the book that might be in.
Girl with Curious Hair.
No, I think Infinite Jest. Although I don't get as much pleasure from reading it, I just don't get it.
You're saying it's hard. It's hard for you to separate. Oblivion has to be a book of discomfort for you because of this discomfort that David was in as he wrote it, whereas Girl was a kind of. That talent was still that kind of astonishingly unself-conscious pleasure in creation kind of moment.
Yeah,
still growing.
He really felt invincible. He felt like he could beat even sickness, which was an incredible sense of liberty for him. Right. He was constantly afraid of breakdowns and of being ill, and so that to me is thrilling. And they're great stories. They read like someone who is smashing down all the prison bars. Oblivion's painful to me, although I think there's great stories in it, because there are moments where he breaks through and he actually does talk about people and do all these things, many incredibly poignant moments, but there's also a lot of closing in and ultimately not getting to that connection, falling backwards, and there's, the suicide hovers over it. There's no way around it.
Is that didn't that Ugly Baby story, wasn't that an earlier story?
Incarnations of
the New Yorker, I think.
Right.
It was published. It was written. There's a little piece in I think it was eventually became part of Pale King.
Yeah,
Right.
it's in there, and it was
Intelligent
in
Baby.
Harper's, but it was bounced
wasn't
around for a while.
Wasn't it earlier? Didn't you tell me it had earlier seeds, like in the 80s?
Well, you read it? No, well, I think it was written, I mean, I saw it in the middle 90s, but again, it was like something he wrote in a morning that made him feel good to write. And he's like, so what do you think? Well, it's an intelligent baby who menaces the world, and it's a page and a half long, and I think it's great, and I don't even know why. But it felt...
I liked it, too.
Deborah, you read, edit, work with stories all day, all night. So you're probably the last person to ask which story of David's has given you the most pleasure, except I think that you're not.
Well, first of all, I think I would probably take issue with Mark's argument that the last great American story collection was written in 1989, because there have been many since then. But
What would you say? I'm curious.
Yeah. Can you endorse it?
I don't. You're gonna make me make, Sophie's Choice. I can't pick between the writers I
Oh,
work
you
with.
can't, you can't say any. Okay.
But I think there are, maybe 20. But I think the one thing we're not talking about here really is Pale King, and the book was put together posthumously by David's incredibly devoted editor, Michael Peach, and it's not a book; it's pieces that were sewn together, and if it was mental illness that did in David the person, it was Pale King that did in David the writer. So there are all kinds of reasons to look at this as a failure. But if you actually look at it in terms of fragment by fragment, I think you see that he worked through a lot of the things that held him down in Infinite Jest, and that there are parts of Pale King which are better than anything else he ever wrote. And the tragedy is he couldn't finish that book, and if he hadn't died, he might not have been able to finish that book or do it in any way that made it work.
Which scenes are you thinking of? Just because we all want
just
to know.
a lot of the backstories, many of the short, and in fact a lot of the central Peoria stuff I think is fantastic. I think that if you take that book chunk by chunk, you will find parts which are in a sense stories, which solve a lot of the problems he was struggling with Infinite Jest and with the story collections that came after Infinite Jest, and he sort of reached his pinnacle for me in some of those parts. And then, the tragedy is it never got to be a book, and he was done in by it. But if you look at him as a writer and you look at the trajectory of how he was actually working sentence by sentence, and the intensity, the absorption, and also the compassion for his subjects, that reaches a height in Pale King for me.
The first 2 pages, I think, are as good as anything he ever wrote.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think when you read it, the potential for it seemed it was going to be the best thing he'd ever written if he'd finished. I mean, we don't know, but some of it is just amazing, and it's also still funny, and it is. I mean, it's got everything good plus all this. Yeah, it did seem like he was figuring it out, and which is why it's just
he
painful
just figured it out in short time slots.
And the thing you're figuring out is because for many of us, Infinite Jest figures it out. What's the question?
Well, I think that what he figures out is how to write about people from close up and far away at the same time. How to take an idea about something, whether it's boredom or whether it's violence or any of these other things that preoccupied him, and actually make it live through people that he felt compassion for, instead of through devices that he was using to get from one place to another and to say something. These were the characters in Pale King are the most developed that he wrote.
except for Gately.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, yeah.
But I mean,
That was played.
in a way, I mean,
Everything's plagiarized from reality. Come on.
That is correct.
well, I have to say, there were moments in researching the biography where I sort of thought to
Many
myself,
people deny that.
what, Mary?
She said everything's plagiarized from reality. I said many fiction writers deny that.
Right. But
Of course it is.
I mean, there were moments in researching it where I was astonished. I mean, there's a story about David's The Girl with Curious Hair collection was all set to go to press, and there's this wonderful story in there called My Appearance, which is about a woman on the Letterman show, and the story was to appear simultaneously in Playboy. And one of the junior editors at Playboy happened to be watching Letterman one night and was astonished to find that the exact lines of dialogue that were in David's story were, being spoken by the actress Susan St. James on TV. That was an example of David taking so directly from reality, it landed him
That's some of the Gately stuff.
in a ton of shit. And Viking canceled the book, terrified of a lawsuit. Not really. Is that your fly or my fly? It's a fly.
It's not mine.
New Yorker sent us a
Jesus.
fly. That's a Syracuse fly.
I beg to differ.
You
It's
guys
too cold to have
shoot
flies.
for it. Anyway, my point.
From New Jersey, for Christ's sake.
Well, we have mosquitoes. We don't have flies, and that is unfair, Mary. I knew you were going to get dirty. My point just being that
What they do to the bitches on the panel. I'm telling you, lady.
that brings up, that's another gift of a segue that I'm not gonna miss, because this one goes to Dana. Yes, the bitches on the panel segue. Okay. When David's at Amherst on the literary magazine Sabrina with Mark, the subject comes up about whether women fart. Segue. And David insists they don't. Now, if you look at David's readership today and the incredible number of women who read him and the incredible number of women on our panel, and the fact that what seemed to be absolutely a given with David, which was that he was a kind of a writer for a certain kind of nerdy, techno, 25-year-old boy who's been totally blown away. My question for Dana is, one, does he draw female characters in a way that is satisfactory, or is it just that all his characters, exist in the same kind of sketched-in way where it really doesn't matter? And this is the kind of introduction I hate as a woman, and a woman writer. Give me your thoughts on David and the woman problem, or the women problem. Come on.
I can't really, because I don't have a problem with him and women as a reader, honestly. I don't. After reading your biography, though,
That's different.
That's different, yeah.
That's different.
So, but I would say that as a reader, when I read Brief Interviews with Hideous Men, I thought he was interrogating the kind of sadism that exists between men and women in this interesting way, the kind of cruelties that come up with desire. I thought it was amazing. And I didn't find it misogynistic in the least bit. And I may be alone in this, but I found it to be brave and interesting interrogation of these relations that he was trying, obviously, I guess, to work through. But as a reader, and in Pale King, I think he has a lot of compassion for a lot of women in his books. But to the extent that there's a lot of single voice moments, there are a lot of conversations that are one-sided. There's a kind of loneliness there. Like I said, it's hard to escape yourself in his books sometimes, and it's usually, the male voice is dominant for sure. He's not alone in this, and it's his right. He's a man. I don't feel excluded from his work because I'm a woman, I guess is what I would say.
It's like Chekhov says, aren't you supposed to isn't art supposed to describe the problem?
Right.
Not solve it.
Right.
Yeah, he did call it Brief Interviews with Hideous Men.
Exactly.
The point was to look at the ways in which men are hideous.
Right.
We
didn't know he was drawing on his own hideousness.
I was always interested in how he always had these hypertrophied male figures. There's something very fey about it. When he described Mark to me, before I met Mark, I thought Mark would be 6'5", with a cowboy hat and boots, and
don't edit it, Mary. Come on.
His dick strapped to his knee.
Thank you.
That's what I envisioned. I was like,
and Dave strapped to my back.
It's hard being Mark. a lot of luggage.
Straps.
No, but I think
Yeah.
that's more interesting to me as a friend of his and in terms of his psychology, as how many of these bloated, uber butch, armored, or cruel, or armored by their sadism or by their cruelty or something, men there are. But to me, that's not offensive. To me, like you said, it's the description of a certain set of problems.
And the self-loathing is reserved for the men.
The self-loath, no, the
Or-
depressed person and all of that. I mean,
Well,
there's
yeah,
plenty of loathing.
Well,
for
remember,
women.
It's loathing to go
he
all
said,
around.
he said
he loathes
remember,
everybody
he
equally.
said he was the depressed person in the end.
Yeah, but he
acknowledged-
quotes Elizabeth Wurtzel
Wow.
and quotes verbatim.
Yeah, but
stuff
I'm saying
from
when he
Prozac
came...
Nation,
when
she's
right.
complaining about her parents not getting her
Yeah.
paying for her braces. He like quotes that as though it's...
But I mean, it's obvious enough as true of any author at any moment. I mean, the main character is at least in some way, almost inevitably, a development of the writer. And David clearly has an enormous amount in common with a sort of narcissistic person who's the central character, the depressed person, who's basically never sure about what reality is on, because the depressed person is basically on the phone all the time to her friends, and she can't figure out whether those friends are really just there out of pity for her. And I think that for David was probably allowing, why did David write so many letters? My wife, when I was working on the biography, she was like, well, so he was a great friend of Don DeLillo's. And I'm like, well, actually, I think they only met once, But look at all these letters, or John, it's like what Mary's saying about John Franzen, John Franzen and David Foster Wallace, they must be incredibly close. I was like, well, no, it was really a epistolary relationship. So, I think for David, and I'm not the first to say this at all, this is Ms. Karr, right? A little bit of distancing, made the day go by much more comfortably. Deborah, you were there to edit David at a moment when he was writing the stories that would either go into The Pale King or stand alone in oblivion, and many of the stories really began as pieces of The Pale King. I'm not really sure where one ends and one begins. But tell me about, if you would, his worries. There's a letter that he wrote to you where he talks about his, worrying about being too sincere, and this sort of tipping point between being, having gone from this brassy creator of these high-tech worlds to, being a little bit too much a kind of cuddly emo man.
Right. Well, you asked me what problem I felt he was trying to solve in The Pale King,
right.
and it does come down to that. It comes down to this issue which you go into in your book of irony versus sentimentality, and how, Infinite Jest was full of sort of both compassion, but also a lot of irony about the sort of ridiculousness of contemporary life, and then he was rebelling against that impulse of his own, which is to make fun of things or to be harsh or to be cruel, and he's very cruel in a lot of his writing. And with Pale King, I think he felt he wanted to get away from that and not be cruel, but then he had this absolute fear of being sentimental, and so yeah, in the letter you're talking about, he was talking about he was very aware that he had this terror of being sentimental, and he was going to fight against it. But at the same time, he was saying, do you think my title's too sentimental? Do you think
Right.
How can and it was a sense of wanting to find a way to write about his characters without any sense at all of authorial judgment, which was what had defined him before then, which was
just
the
to
way
let
that
the
he
characters
judged his
exist
characters, which was that there was
You didn't
this
think
sense of
that there was a
judgment.
lot of judgment of him?
What's that?
You didn't think he had a lot of judgment of his characters?
I think he did before Pale King.
Early on, yeah.
Yeah,
But
I think
Pale
every
King.
other piece of writing he was
Right.
judging his characters.
Right.
And then I think
I
at
see what you're saying.
At the end, he was trying to find a way not to do that.
Right.
Right.
Well, not to do that while still writing immersively.
While still getting at the center of them. So he was going for characters who were more boring, and he was going for characters who were less easy to judge. Like he wasn't going for the hideous men.
But it just reminds me of something. I've read most of the part of Pale King that didn't wind up in the book, and I still find the Good People excerpt, which Deborah edited at the New Yorker, sounds unlike anything else David ever wrote. Did he ever talk to you about that?
He was very, very. He was always very particular, but he was very, very particular about the tone of that story when we worked on editing it. And this is it's basically a takeoff on Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants, in which a young man and woman sit together and talk without talking about the fact that she's pregnant and that she's supposed to get an abortion, but maybe she's not going to get the abortion, and maybe they're going to end up together, and it's all kind of internal monologue. And he very, very, very much did not want to be making fun of these two Southern fundamentalist Christian, almost virtual children. He wanted to understand them. And so for me, that was a shift.
Yeah.
I thought that worked really well.
Yeah.
No, it's a beautiful story, although, I mean, when it's plugged into the novel, it takes on a somewhat different meaning because I think his name is Lane
because later you
Dean.
see how Lane Dean's life has been ruined by this.
Yeah,
by having this baby.
and the picture of his child on the desk doesn't save him, come from kind of the enormous despair in the sense of like having fallen through a great hole in the floor into a cataclysmic depression. But when it stood alone in the New Yorker, I mean, it was really almost as if he was inhabiting a different, I mean, he had great range, so it wasn't as if you didn't expect, I mean, one of the great things about David is the courage to follow Infinite Jest with brief interviews and to follow brief interviews with Oblivion. I mean, it's true he was working through literary problems that had nothing to do with courage in the marketplace, but he was also aware of the marketplace, and I think he knew, I mean, there's a letter he wrote, I think to his editor, Michael Peach, when Brief Interviews is about to come out, where he says that it's a book that's mean to practically everyone it's possible to be mean to. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he knew the implications of that. Now, I see the microphones have come out, and that is an invitation for anyone who has questions and would like to ask any of the panel members or me or all of us to ask those questions. So if you would go to the microphones, if you do have a question, we can go in order.
Nope, okay.
No, I see, I see plenty of movement, and it tends to, people have to get out from the middle of these chairs, which is not easy. And I won't have to tell you to speak loudly because you've got a microphone, so please.
Hi there. Is this on?
Yeah.
Perfect.
And if you can say who you're addressing it to, that's helpful.
I suppose anyone who feels qualified enough to answer.
Fair enough. That would be Mary.
Not me.
A lot of Infinite Jest seems to be about the overload of information out there that's possible to sort of be put in front of you in various ways. And I was wondering how much he anticipated that parts of it would be skimmed or parts of it would be jettisoned by the reader and just said, fuck it, I'm going to skip these 20 pages or this footnote.
I mean, did he anticipate that people would read it almost the way they would, the way that you filter out information as you go through the world?
Right.
That's what I told him. I mean, I just told him, and that's the opposite of what I want to do with a reader. I don't know what anybody else says, but I always think if they start skimming, then I've lost or I've betrayed them somehow.
I mean, personally, I think he was enough of a narcissist to never imagine that anyone would skim anything that he wrote. I know there's a letter he wrote to Michael Peach that's in Every Love Story is a Ghost Story, where he says, I may have a bit of an arrogance problem. I just expect people to read parts of the book twice. And it actually rewards second readings. He wasn't, I mean, it turns out that he was right. So, I mean, I think another really interesting question, which it sort of connects to, is do we read Infinite Jest differently now that we're in this internet era that really, I mean, Infinite Jest is written in 1996. I don't know if you remember what the internet was like then. You know, and I think that's an interesting, one of the panelists would like to maybe...
Well, I was going to say, Sylvanshine in Pale King has that relationship to the data psychic, fact psychic stuff, which is also about that kind of data overload and how to deal with the overwhelming terms of what it's like to be alive today. So I think, you know, it would have been great to see him continue to deal with all that stuff.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I think one thing to add to that is that he believed the book would be a failure in terms of, you know, how you all received it. I mean, I remember being with him right after it was published, and the first big review was withering, one of the worst book reviews I've ever seen.
Oh, it was the Times. It was Jay McInerney.
No names, Mary, no names. It was referred to as a bloated dirigible of a book, and we were at the beach, which was two very pale people at the beach. We were Pale Kings.
The Pale King himself.
And he said he didn't give a fuck. He was happy. He's like, whatever. I truly don't care how many people read it. So I think he was completely fine with the idea of a few devoted readers who might read this book successively and go back and read the parts that you skimmed and so on and so forth. I don't think, you know, the conventional reading experience meant very little to him. And in that sense, people talk about him anticipating a web aesthetic or something like that. I don't think he had anything like that in his mind. No. But he certainly didn't care about the conventional, you sit down and read my book at a Starbucks and hand it to your friend. And the failure of the book to be a conventional reading experience, he really didn't give a shit about it.
Well, I mean, it's even deliberate. His great worry, probably among other worries, was that the book would be too easy to read because for him, narrative, David always said Mark might disagree, but David always said that his first and primary addiction was to television. And what's curious is that he was really addicted to narrative in television. And so to give people something too narratively, if that's the word, easy to digest would itself be giving them a bit of poison rather than the cure. Next, good question.
There's been a lot of discussion about drawing from reality for the fiction, but I was wondering if you could speak a bit about where his nonfiction sort of stands in his canon. There's been a lot of discussion about the fiction, but I was wondering your opinions on working for assignment for magazines and such.
So what the question about his nonfiction?
Where his nonfiction sort of stands.
Where does it stand in the canon of his work?
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this. I think that the two pieces that he wrote for Harper's in the early 90s, one about the Illinois State Fair and then a cruise ship piece, I think they're not only great pieces of writing, in the sort of the great Wallace stuff. I also think they were where this voice was reborn that became Infinite Jest. So I think they're important, equally important to the greatest fiction, both as pieces of writing and also in terms of where he sort of split his atoms. Of the later fiction, some of the nonfiction, some of them read to me like immediate Dave. It was happening for him. I could, he wrote this fast. I can feel it, maybe even in one sitting, and others of them feel more constructed to me. Which is not surprised true of every.
So the Federer would be pleasure, and the talk show host piece would be work.
Federer was probably the last time in his life he was happy writing.
And which pieces feel to you?
The John McKay.
I like that piece, but Consider the Lobster, which is, for example, a piece just feels to me more constructed. Like he had an idea, and then he had a chess game with this idea, and he elaborated it. And by then he was a crafty old dude, and he had a reputation, and he, good Lord.
I have no idea what that is.
But that's different from how he felt like you should write, which was literally almost in one sitting, which is an absolutely crazy way to create things.
One comment about his nonfiction is that his sister told me that this is a question of kind of extraordinary quality of taking from reality for his fiction. His sister told me that with David, within the family, it was, they never worried about the nonfiction. It was the fiction that they looked out for, meaning that he put more truth in some ways into the fiction than the nonfiction. One of the kind of funny stories too about David, because he has a tendency to become this kind of Brett has already destroyed the Saint Dave myth for us today, but he was actually very, in some ways, kind of endearingly practical. And Consider the Lobster is an absolutely beautiful essay, really about the immorality of is it all right to boil alive a sentient creature for our gustatory pleasure? That's his straw man line, and you're out of your mind if you think it is all right after you read this essay. But Dave himself enjoyed 2 lobsters that night.
Right.
So
Also
I think you have to see that there's always a performer, as there always was an author behind David.
But there's also some real stubbornness in that piece, because Gourmet sent him to a lobster festival to write a piece for Gourmet about eating lobster.
I know. No,
and he came back with a moral ethical
lobster
piece about whether one can boil lobsters alive. And I remember
with a whole history of the sort of neurological systems of shellfish too, and they're just
And I remember at the time his agent Bonnie called me up and said, David wrote this piece for Gourmet. I don't think they're going to do it. Maybe you'll want to see it. I don't think there's a chance in hell they're going to take it. And then to their credit, they
they took it. Yeah. Do you want to ask over there?
So so the panel's kind of talked a little bit about this, but in front, and they kind of hinted on this. So in the Jonathan Franzen grievance, for the New Yorker, he writes further away. He says that this guy was depressed, but he was also pulling a Kurt Cobain, which is what you said in the panel during the discussion. The question is, what do you make of the suicide from a very smart, very sensitive man? And you were just talking about his practicality and his purposes.
So the question is, what do...
Was he pulling a Kurt Cobain where he knew that
That's
he'd
exactly
be
right.
immortalized by the
I see.
suicide
I
would
think-
seal his...
I think when anyone writes about, anyone who's close to someone who kills themselves writes about it relatively soon after. There's going to be a lot of anger, and it's going to be quite unprocessed, and that anger is going to come through even in the most compassionate piece. And the way I thought about it, what was helpful for me at the time when it happened was actually talking to another writer who's suffered his whole life with depression, who said this is, it's not, because the way it happened and all of that, it felt very aggressive towards David's wife and so on, who had to find him. And so this other writer said it's not that you wake up one day and you say, I'm going to kill myself today. It's that you wake up every single day saying, how can I not? And just switching that around made it clear enough to me anyway that this was not an act of career advancement. This was not about getting more fans and creating a legend. This was about mental illness.
I mean, he couldn't write anymore for whatever set of reasons. And if he can't write, marriage, being someone's son, being someone's brother.
Do some charity work.
Well, I'm not judging him. I'm just saying for him that ceased. That wasn't enough Velcro to keep him on the planet. So he couldn't write anymore. The Federer piece was the last time that his ass left the chair, as he used to put it, that the writing was so inspired that he no longer felt, his butt in a chair as he wrote. It was transcendent. And then it's sort of, the UFO stopped coming. He could no longer see this thing arrive that changed everything. So he couldn't write, and he couldn't find another reason to stick around. And of course, people who were close to him would say, what about this reason? What about this reason? What about the people who personally care about you? And it just didn't end up being enough.
Next question over there.
Hi. I guess, why do you think it's important to be good to your reader, or nice to your reader? Mary,
Why is it important to be good to your reader?
Right, Mary keeps emphasizing the importance of being good to the reader.
What else is there? You ought to spank them or something? Or?
Well, no, the first questioner...
what's plan B? Help me understand.
The first person with the question brought up a very interesting point that Infinite Jest could be seen as perhaps that you can look at it and realize that you're supposed to be processing it in the same way that you're supposed to process the barrage of information on the internet, and that it might be alienating to the reader, but it's an extremely important performance, if you will, it's an extremely important object that says something about culture.
I'm lonelier than that. I'm lonely. When I read, I want to feel. I read, it's like, there's a great line by poet Philip Larkin about a poem. He says, the reader puts, a poem is very like a slot machine. The reader puts the penny of his attention in the slot and pulls a handle and gets a feeling out. For me, the only reason for art is that feeling, which makes me feel less like, blowing my brains out, makes me feel more connected to another human being. So for me, that's absolutely requisite, and the rest is like television. It's pyrotechnic, it's that's just an aesthetic value. It's very old-fashioned. It's very capital R romantic. But it's also just dispositional. I'm just a sad person, and I like to feel connected to people.
Yeah, I think plan A, at least, David experienced plan A for the first really 2.5 of his books, which is that the purpose of writing was to make him feel brilliant and accomplished. And then in the latter part of his life, it's about trying to connect to the reader, make the reader feel less alone. I would add, I think in practice the distinction is probably overstated in David.
Yeah, he's trying to do both.
Broom of the System, for all its kind of tinsely pyrotechnics, certainly made me feel less lonesome when I read it. But I think David had a tendency to do a kind of binary formulation in everything. And so for him, there's a flip when he discovers Dawn Gately. But in practice, there's beautiful girl curious has a beautifully drawn young woman in the Jeopardy story as well. Can we go to the next question? Thank you.
Thank you. I guess this question is primarily directed to Dana because she's the panelist who didn't know David. And The name of this panel was Rereading David Foster Wallace, and I guess that is in light of his suicide, and since he's gone, and the proliferation of things like your book that have shown us more about who the author is, who the author was of these books that we all ostensibly love. That's a complicated question that brings up issues of authorship and, you know, all the stuff that David would have found interesting, and I think what he would have found interesting about the panel is less, tell us more about this guy, than, I mean, Rereading David Foster Wallace, the subject of that is the reader, the audience, and what the experience of coming back to his books has been since then, and the proliferation of more that we learn about the author himself, and how that's affected the experience. Like, I've gone back and reread A Supposedly Fun Thing, and now that I know more about him, it seems like a deeply sadistic thing for Harper's to have done to send him on this cruise, given the issues that he had. And I just wonder, from your point of view, what your experience has been learning more about him and how that's colored your experience of going back to these things that you read before.
To be honest, when I'm reading his fiction, I'm persuaded by him. Still, it still feels very vital. It's still really funny. It's still really moving. It's still really frustrating. It's still really inspiring. Writers are humans, and they're messed up, and they're imperfect, and that's no shock.
Speak for yourself.
And I think, that when you read Daniel's book, it seems clear to me that it was sort of a miracle he managed to stay alive as long as he did. And I feel, and I don't know him, and I'm not his friend or anything like that, is that the fiction was probably the parts when things were going really well, was when the fiction was coming.
Right.
And so it doesn't feel like it's born out of despair. It feels the opposite to me. But I try not to think about it, because I really think I want to experience the books on their own and see that. But it makes, of course, he had a really damaged experience for whatever reason. And I think it's just amazing that he was able to write as much as he did and write as well as he did, given how much pain he was in. I mean, that's sort of miraculous.
We're going to take maybe one more question, if that's all right, and then we'll finish up.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Sorry, everybody, but
there's a story, like particularly in the Rolling Stone piece that came out after David Wallace died, where he's like, he can't finish The Pale King, and so he goes off the Nandril to be like more clear-headed in order to finish it.
Right.
And then that was sort of the downward spiral. I just wondered if any of you believe that story. There's more to it than that, I guess.
Well, I mean, I certainly do believe it. I'm not. If the question is like, wasn't it a lifetime of? I mean, there were so many things going on in David's head at that point. I think he was certainly trying to write better, and he was trying any way he could to find a way out of the impasse of not being able to write Pale King the way he wanted. So he felt that the antidepressant that he was on, and I think nearly everybody who's on antidepressants feels somehow that they're not really getting a really clear picture of the world, or not as intense a picture as they might like to get. There were other things going on. I mean, the drug he was on, Nardil, is very hard to metabolize. And then, also David was a member of a 12-step program, and in that 12-step program, there were always some people who thought you should be off of everything. And David had actually tried this before in 1988 and nearly died then. So, I think the question, I certainly believe, but do I, John Franson said something I thought was really beautiful and accurate at a service for David at NYU shortly after his death. He said that people who think that David died of a biochemical condition don't need the sorts of stories that David wrote for us. So I think there's great complexity in that. We're going to end this slightly unusually, which is I'm going to thank the participants, and then if you would hold whatever applause you might wish to give us, Mary is going to read a very beautiful portion of a very beautiful poem that she wrote recently that was in Poetry Magazine. So I will just first thank our participants. Thank you, Deborah Treisman, and thank you, Mark Costello, and thank you, Dana Spiotta, and thank you, Mary Karr, but we'll, and then this is, because in the end, this is a celebration of David and David's talent, and we all wouldn't be here if it weren't for David's talent, and you all wouldn't be here if it weren't for David's talent. I think would be a nice way we all agreed to end it with this sort of little elegy.
I also think I felt very sad about doing this, and then I thought, he would love this shit. He would be up there drunk as a monkey, very happy about the occasion. So I'm only going to read part of it. I hope you've been taken up by Jesus, though so many decades have passed, so far apart we'd grown, between love transmogrifying into hate and those sad letters and phone calls and your face vanishing into a noose, that I couldn't today name the gods you at the end worshipped, if any. I wonder, does your death feel like a failure to everybody who ever loved you, as if our collective CPR stopped too soon, the defib paddles lost charge, the corpse punished us by never sitting up? And forgive my conviction that every suicide is an asshole. There is a good reason I am not God, for maybe I would cruelly smite the self-smitten. I just wanted to say, ha ha. Despite your best efforts, you are every second alive in a hard-gnawing way for all who breathed you deeply in. Each set of lungs, those rosy implanted wings, pink balloons. We sigh you out into the air, and we watch you rise like rain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you all for coming.